5-1, playing against Anthony Zamberlan, who you might remember from yesterday, playing Jund for the elimination rounds.
That's right, and Chris Van Meter lost the roll, has to be on the draw. He'll open with Forest and matched by an island.
Disciple of the Old Ways makes Chris first to the board. Chris is playing a pretty hard 3-color deck, not a lot of splashing going on, but he can also be pretty aggressive, as you can see him leading out a 2-drop here.
Right, you know, it's pretty interesting. The decks that we've seen doing well are actually the ones without the mana fixing. It's been strange. I don't know if that's a small sample size or what, but the people who have gotten the commons, not the guild gates, but the powerful commons, seem to be winning here.
Sure, they're just playing durable creatures, and the mana is just kind of working itself out.
Yep.
Not a lot of double-colored cards across 3 sets compared to most blocks, I feel like, at least not at the upper reaches of playability.
That's right.
Chris off to a strong start here with 5 power on the board against Hanada from Anthony. He's got Chromatic Lantern, so he could do pretty much anything with his 5 mana if he has a 4th land here.
Yeah, the 3 islands, it was looking pretty ugly, but luckily for him, he has the Lantern, and we'll see what he can play with it.
Soulsworn Spirit, that'll slow things down.
All right, not the best, but it does buy him a little bit of time to get his aggression online. Hopefully next turn he can deploy a more defensive creature. So these players at 5-1 playing to hopefully lock up a spot in the top 8.
Yeah, given the size of the tournament, we're only a few players over the cut. It should be a lock to be 5-1-1 for the top 8. Of course, you might encounter someone who's more interested in playing for their seeding, as because of the small player count, an X2 could actually be sneaking in, and if that's the case, then why not battle?
Yeah, all bets are off in that case. So Disciple of the Old Ways is able to get in. The Monitor, of course, has to stay at home. Anthony 16, Chris 20.
Anthony moving to start evening things up as Soulsworn Spirit attacks. If you look at Chris's hand, it looks like I see a Moored Burst, a Dreadbore, and a Devour Flesh, I believe?
Yep.
Which is a lot of removal, as they say in the biz.
That's what the Jund deck is best at.
Anthony playing Basilisk Creature. Chris probably considering maybe Devour Fleshing in response, but decides not to.
Is that a Rakdos Drake?
That is, I believe, a Hired Torturer. It's a 2/3 defender. 3 and a black tap. Target player reveals a card at random from their hand, and that player loses 2 life.
Not a bad card, especially when the board stalls out. That lets you use that card during every draw phase of your opponent, giving you perfect information.
Yep. I've actually come around on the guy. He's got a reasonable body for his size against a lot of these Boros and Rakdos decks. A 2/3 for 3 is totally respectable. And his ability can actually, play pretty nicely with the Extort endgame, where you're just trying to drain your opponent. When you don't have a spell for your turn, you just pay 4 mana, make him lose 2 life, and the next spell is even more dangerous.
Yep, so Devour Flesh, Chris Van Meter pointing right at the Hired Torturer, maybe assuming Anthony's going to sack that, but we'll see.
Yeah, this definitely offers Anthony the maximum number of options, which kind of would indicate that Chris wants him to pick the Hired Torturer, as, why would he wait until it was in play otherwise?
Right.
But perhaps he's got another plan in mind.
Wow, Basilisk Creature, that's really surprising, especially since Anthony already has 6 lands, or 6 mana.
Of all the creatures in play, the Basilisk Creature certainly seemed like one of the better ones. Hired Torturers, I like the guy fine. I used to dislike him a great deal, but he's no Basilisk Creature.
Right.
Basilisk Creature can very easily get in for 2 points a turn at the cost of only 1 additional mana, thanks to his 1/2 body in the air, and Extort tagged onto a spell.
So Chris Van Meter coming in for 5, trying to drop Anthony to 12, and he'll be successful.
Yeah, Dreadbore clears out that Hired Torture. That's a primo removal spell we burned there. That's not one of the little ones like Devour Flesh, so...
I guess Chris really wanted to get rid of that Torturer, huh?
Yeah, I think that putting pressure on the opponent is reasonable in this format. It's difficult to do compared to formats previously. Obviously, the format has slowed down a great deal. There are a lot of 2/4s, but, when your opponent's actually lacking on defense, you might as well just get in there. Soulsworn Spirit, Fearless attacks. Anthony not planning to chump this turn, clearly.
Yep, the Spirit cannot be stopped. He's going to peck in for 2 until Chris can deal with them or wins the game. Now, interesting to know, Anthony has available to him Lavinia of the 10th, a card that me and Todd talked about earlier. It's super powerful, rare from Dragon's Maze. Yeah. And if Anthony ever draws that in a tight race situation, it should lock it up.
Does he have any tricks like Aetherize, maybe? Or, something that could really blow out combat for Chris here? Because otherwise I would cite him as being in a fair bit of trouble right now.
Well, he has 1 Azorius Charm, he has 1 Dramatic Rescue, but no super blowouts like, no overload cards, no Aetherize, it seems like.
Chris is going to come in for 5. He's willing to see what's up. Looks like it is going to be the Azorius Charm on Thrashing Moss Dog. That'll put the new 3/3 Reacher right back to the top of the deck.
Yep.
Chris is, yeah, whatever. It's cool. Obviously, Chris is a little strapped on mana, but he doesn't mind drawing a spell he can cast next turn. Looks like he has Gutter Skull, Dead Reveler, Morgue Burst, and I think a Grizzly Spectacle in his hand, if I got all 4 of those cards. So he's just going to keep attacking.
Yeah, and he's really tight on mana right now. He can't cast that Grizzly Spectacle. He can't cast 2 spells in 1 turn. His best chance is to beat Anthony down right now.
Anthony, I believe, has Profit Loss in his hand, which could create a favorable combat moving forward. Not this turn, probably. He sticks the 2/3, which is going to be enough to keep Disciple the Old Ways out of combat. Anthony probably just going to take 3 damage from Dead Reveler and nod as the Moss Dog hits. But then next turn, he can leave both creatures back, leave open Profit Loss with Fuse, and Chris will certainly smell something, but it's unclear as to whether he'll be able to do anything.
Exactly. Profit Loss is just so powerful in combat, and if Chris skips attacking or only attacks with 1 creature to try and play around it, well, then Anthony doesn't have to play it at all and can just Time Walk Chris again the very next turn.
Yep.
In addition to Profit Loss, Anthony also has Far and Away at his disposal, another really a big blowout split card.
He's casting Dramatic Rescue this turn. That'll go ahead and bounce that Thrashing Moss Dog once more, slowing Chris down, buying Anthony room, and the Soulsworn Spirit, continuing to just tick away.
That's right. It seemed like a really unimpressive turn 4 play by Anthony, but it prevented 3 damage, and it's dealt so far. How much was that? It's about to deal 11 damage, 10 damage. That's pretty good for a 4-drop.
Yeah, I'll take it. Sends in the 2, and nothing else. So, not willing to get super aggressive with his Dead Reveler. Content to keep the Disciple of the Old Ways at bay, which seems probably correct here. He could knock Chris to 9, but then he'd himself be risking going to 4. And there are actually cards he could die to at that point.
Exactly, and there's always that Key Rune waiting in the wings as well.
I think that's a Cluestone, actually.
Oh, Cluestone, my bad. Clue Rune, Keystone.
He doesn't know it, but Chris has a Morgue Burst in his hand. That could definitely go to the Nugget.
So there it is. There's the 3/3 again.
He joins us once more, Thrashing Moss Dog. I believe the 3rd Moss Dog in Magic Gathering. I think that's correct.
Just keep coming back for more, don't they?
I'm getting a sage nod from our flavor specialist, Jesse Snyder, from the directing booth.
Yep, we keep him on hand at all times in case we have flavor text questions.
Vorthos is magic.
So the Dead Reveler gets sent in. Anthony can't do anything about that.
Keymaster Rogue. That's going to probably be picking up Soulsworn Spirit here, and if Anthony has another land, he can, lock down that Thrashing Moss Dog for, again, another turn.
Wow.
Thrashing Moss Dog is just really not liking Soulsworn Spirit at this point, I imagine. He's thoroughly unamused by his spirited antics.
I think he's defriended the Spirit on Facebook even. Which is a drastic move, but...
It's aggressive.
Yeah.
Now note that Anthony's actually threatening a lethal attack with Profit Loss here. If Chris decides to, go all out with everybody, he'll have to, be put to the test on whether he blocks with that Thrashing Moss Dog or not.
Right. But first of all, Chris gets to attack Anthony Zamberlan. The Dead Reveler at least will be coming in. Maybe even the Moss Dog.
Well, Moss Dog's attained.
Oh, okay.
Yep, so he's got options. I think it's just the Dead Reveler, probably this turn. Yep, Chris arrives at the same conclusion. That'll lock Anthony out of being able to create, a potentially lethal combat step, but it'll certainly give him the ability to put Chris in a bad spot, which is exactly what Anthony wants. He wants to be able to have 6 mana open right at the moment that the board starts to turn. Right now, Chris falling a little bit behind, but still very much in it, and the 6 mana available, that's when you turn around. And you can really easily, get worked into these spots by going for them too early. As you said, if he holds open 6 mana, Chris cannot attack on a turn, maybe try and wait him out, and then Anthony doesn't take damage, but he also didn't commit anything else to the board. He's really just creating this, stabilizing effect, which, is not really what you want when you have, I think, Profit Loss. You actually want to, engender your opponent into getting into a race because you can win it.
Yeah, maximum profit. That's the goal.
Bomber Core, that's a nice one, and Gutter Skulk. So Chris threatening to trigger Battalion with the Bomber Core, which can take Soulsworn Spirit out of the equation.
Right. Anthony now, he has to decide how best to use this Profit Loss.
Yeah, it's either this turn or during Chris's turn. Otherwise, he's dead unless he has some other spell. Anthony, as we discovered yesterday, has a habit of putting his hand to the side, so we aren't sure how many other options he might have. But we can confirm the presence of that split card in his hand.
Anthony
assuming that's the one he has.
He likes to keep it close to the plaid. And I think before the turn started, he had one other card in hand, I want to say, but we don't know what it is. I don't think it's a land. But even if it's a spell, it has to cost 2 or less to be relevant this turn.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like Anthony's going to decide on just the Soulsworn Spirit. The Keymaster Rogue might have to stay home to block.
Yeah, the Soulstorm Spirit has to attack because it'll be dead once Chris attacks anyway. So there's not really any incentive to not swing with it. Unless he was planning to cast the Profit Loss in response to the Battalion Trigger, in which case he could save it, but it would die in blocking any of those creatures. So that's probably not what he wants to be doing. This is a dangerous spot, though. He's dead to a variety of things. He doesn't know it, but he's dead to almost Chris's entire hand.
Yeah, and this is really the classic case of Mana Flood versus Mana Screw.
There's a Mord Burst, so at this point, Chris just needs to get one of his creatures dead, pretty much, and that will be enough.
I think that might happen this turn.
Yeah. Obviously, if Dead Revelers or Thrashing Moss Dog dies, then he's got it immediately. But if it's one of the other ones, he'll actually have to squeak in a point, which I imagine will happen if Gutter Skulk, as I suspect it will, goes unblocked.
Right.
Chris can also use the Battalion Trigger from Bomber Corps to just send that straight upstairs. That'll bring Anthony to 2, and then any of his creatures dying make the Mord Burst lethal. That's probably the option he's going to go for here. Just Alpha, put Anthony to 2, and make him do something.
Right, and Chris, it's not that easy of a play for Chris because there are so many instants in this format, and Anthony can have any combination of a few of them in his hand to completely blow him out this combat. It's really tough to put your opponent on exactly Profit Loss.
Yeah. He's really concerned about ones that gain life, I think. Those are, like, all of the bad things that can happen to him are mitigated by the fact he actually has a non-combat kill available to him.
Right.
So he really just wants to make sure it's not something like Dramatic Rescue that can really just reverse things completely and leave him both dead on board and unable to kill Anthony.
Yeah, and it could easily be something like a Warcaller's Helix.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any mountains on Anthony's side of the board, but there is that Chromatic Lantern.
He did knock Anthony to 2 with the Bomber Corps, as we predicted. So now it's really on Anthony. He's got to kind of make his bed here. Hope that it's not too rough.
Looks like he's going for, well...
Right now, he's just dead without anything in addition to Profit Loss, because even if he blocks the largest creatures, he's still taking 2 damage from Disciple of the Old Ways and Gutter Skulk.
Right, and it looks like he realizes that
happens,
sweeps him up. He's not even going to make Chris show him the Mord Burst.
Now, I do want to note that if Anthony had gotten in that one attack with Dead Reveler that we discussed, it kind of seemed like not a great proposition when it was like 11-7.
Right.
But if he'd gotten in that one attack, he would have had lethal on the board last turn.
Yeah. He
would have been able to send in Soulsworn Spirit and Keymaster Rogue, Profit for the win, 7 to Chris's 9 was where he was stuck at. So, that's one of those things where, you got to kind of pattern it down the road. Maybe it was even, incorrect to attack with that guy, but certainly the way the math worked out, it's worth going back, reconsidering your options, how you could have approached that game in Limited more so than in any other format.
Right, and I think that the problem that turn was that Anthony didn't have the Keymaster Rogue yet, so he wasn't sure if he was trying to race or if he was trying to play defensive, but with Profit Loss in hand, like you said, it's really tough to be on the back foot with Profit Loss. It's just the wrong way to use the card.
Yeah, the card is incredibly powerful when you can make your opponent block you.
Yes.
It's much weaker when you're trying to block them because they have to fear something. You're passing with creatures untapped, mana untapped. You've got cards in hand. They're not idiots. They know that something's going to happen.
Chris Van Meter, no slouch, no stranger to the feature match area, no stranger to Limited either.
Like Chris Van Meter has a draft open win to his name. In fact, not a lot of people know that, but he is one of the holders of the Triple Crown, as it were, in the SCG Open Series.
It's pretty tough to do.
It's
Jerry's
much harder
done that, right?
now that Jerry I believe has also done that. It's much harder now that we don't have draft opens really anymore outside of the invitationals. So not as many of those plaques going around.
Should have gotten them while they were cheap.
I believe Nick Spagnolo may have been the first person to achieve that particular feat.
Nick Spagnuolo not in attendance this weekend. He was at the Star City Games Classic in Pittsburgh.
Buying all the Magic cards.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So as we shuffle up for Game 2, it doesn't look like either player has done much sideboarding.
Yeah, Chris, I know, was talking about considering, trying an Esper version of his deck out against other slow decks. But I think that after seeing his opponent's creatures and how vulnerable they were to, especially his own, just mostly a bunch of 2 and 1 toughness guys, he's probably fine with where he is. I know he said he frequently sides out the Bomber Core for Cobble Brute, as his deck is incredibly bad at triggering Battalion. Obviously, amusingly enough, Battalion locked up the win right there.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Anthony's deck, I think he's pretty well positioned to fight against Chris already. I don't expect to see him make too many changes. Really, all Chris showed him was a bunch of ground powders and a few removal spells.
The only card in Chris's sideboard that I think he probably should have been main decking, obviously I don't think the Bomber Core is very good in his deck either, because it's not, but he has a Give-Take in his sideboard, which I think it's really easy to look at that card as, a blue-green card, but it's actually not. It's basically a Moldervine Cloak that you can't get back on the green side, which is very, very reasonable. And he has a few things like the Thrashing Ceradon, I believe that's its name, the Guild Pack 4/3 or Gatecrash 4/3 that gives trample to creatures with +1/+1 counters. That guy obviously pretty good with Give, and he actually has sources of blue in his deck as well. He has access to a Transguild Promenade, and I think he has a Prism or something, a Verdant Haven, that's what it is, to give him blue. So he can actually fire it off for the draw, in addition to being able to just, play a Disciple of the Old Ways on turn 2 and then make it a 5/5 on turn 3 and put the opponent under maximum pressure.
Yeah, it seemed like he had a pretty good curve that game. It seemed like he had a decent number of 2-drops. The Give-Take is something I would look at.
His only 3-drop, I believe, in his deck actually is Dead Reveler, if I recall him laying out the curve. He has, a Cluestone and Dead Reveler, and that's about it. So the Give-Take also, kind of fills in a hole that he already had. Plus, if he happens to have a creature that's actually, getting through, perhaps, I don't think he has any flyers. I can't remember for sure, but it's an ideal target.
Or something.
Yeah.
When Chris Van Meter wants something, though, it's just a matter of give and take. Oh, I know. I had to fit that one in somewhere. I'd be really ashamed of myself if I didn't. So do you think Chris will choose to draw or play?
Yeah, I think he'll choose to play. His deck's much more aggressive than most of the sealed decks that we've seen. As I discussed with Todd, I enjoy drawing in the format. I think that it's generally where you want to be. But when you're actually trying to beat them down with Disciple of the Old Ways, you're probably a little more interested in the play.
Right. I keep looking over Anthony's deck list, and it's pretty interesting the white cards he's chosen to include and not include. It's almost like he's splashing for Assault Griffin here and splashing for the Syndic of Tides. White is is the color he has the least of. And with very few mana fixers, he's really relying on that Chromatic Lantern.
Seems like Anthony is mulliganing, yep. I'm not sure if Anthony chose to play or draw for the second game. We went over what we think Chris would do if it came to a third one. I kind of think Anthony, regardless of his usual intent, might want to deprive Chris of the play in Game 2.
Yeah, I mean, with how that game went, Chris was really clearly intent on beating him down. He cast the Devour Flesh trying to get rid of that 2/3 defender, and then he cast Dreadbore when Anthony didn't sack the 2/3 defender, so pretty clearly Chris is the beatdown here in this matchup.
Yeah, that was one of the better hired tortures I've ever seen, and it didn't really do anything.
A pretty interesting one in Anthony's deck that I would almost want him to side out is the Biomass Mutation. If you're unfamiliar, it's blue X. Creatures you control become XX until end of turn from Gatecrash. Not at its best against the Jund aggro.
No, I think that Anthony, probably likes the card thanks to its power level with his unblockable creatures, which can, let him fireball for the kill here and again. But I agree that in this matchup, he's really just trying to wrangle control. And if he has a spot where he can cast something like Biomass Mutation, odds are he was already looking pretty good.
Right. Though, that said, it would have been pretty good that game.
Yeah, it would have won on the back of those unblockable creatures. It would have been enough. Maybe that's his game plan, Maybe we just didn't get to see him really put his deck through its paces. Perhaps he's actually one of the more aggressive blue flyer decks as opposed to the more controlling one. That would certainly make his profit loss all the scarier.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense with the splashing for Assault Griffin and leaving some of the maybe better white cards out, the strictly better white cards, but more defensive.
Anthony with an island. It looks like Anthony took the draw, I believe, and put Chris on the play. Leads with Murmuring Phantasm, a 0/5 defender. One of the better uses of Murmuring Phantasm I've seen is actually as an evolve card for Simic decks. It plays like a really cheap Leyline Phantasm that also, gets in the way of ground pounders early, lets your Beetleform mages do some work, etc.
And this is exactly the start that Anthony wanted here. The 05 Defender is the perfect foil to Chris's deck. Unless, of course, he has that give that we were talking about.
Yeah, give would be a sweet one right here, and he's already got a blue source if he happens to draw it later. I'm relatively curious whether he brought it in or not. Looks like Chris... He has another land, but I think he's going to Devour Flesh the 05 wall, just clear it out. It's one of his more efficient solutions, but obviously the 5 life is nothing to slouch at. He can't be happy about it.
Yeah, kind of counterproductive if you're using the Devour Flesh to clear out a wall to get in, but hey, you know what? Chris is not going to have the choice later in the game, so...
Yeah, you'll note that he does have a Gorklan Rampager in his hand, so he could have actually used that to get through the wall, but it probably values having a 4/4 attacking Trampler.
Right.
Which, who can blame him?
Oh, and Dreadbore drawn by Chris Van Meer. That's a great draw. That's going to clear out this Phantasm if he wants it to let him keep getting in with the Disciple.
Yeah. Chris considering his options. If he didn't want a Blood Rush the previous turn, I can't imagine he wants to Blood Rush now. Maybe he does.
He's going to at least put Anthony to the test.
Yeah, to be fair, there are a lot of tricks Chris can have here. Obviously, any Blood Rusher is totally fine. Rubble Belt Mako would be one of the scarier ones, but he's going to Gorklan Rampager.
Yep, and he doesn't even need to spend the extra red to give it first strike, because it becomes the 4/4. So Anthony takes 1 damage, down to 22.
The Leyline Phantom was going to trump the 4/4 if Chris relied on it to actually start getting in the beats, but he had the Dreadbore to kill it, so it's possible that he's just planning to hold out. Maybe he figures, my opponent mulliganed. If I could just run him out of cards, I can let this 2/2 actually kill him regardless of his upper starting life total.
Exactly, and just like me and Todd were talking about in a previous round, you have to save these premium removal spells for the bomb creatures, and Anthony's 5/1. He has to have at least a few rares in his deck, or so Chris Van Meter thinks.
Yeah, I think this turn we're probably just going to wind up slowing down, though. I'd much rather commit Thrashing Moss Dog to the board than play any of our removal, and clearly Chris feels the same.
Yep. The Moss Dog will allow that, or rather not allow the Basilica Screecher to attack, so the board currently is at parity.
Zor's Gig Gate for Anthony gives him a non-chromatic lantern, source of white. Obviously he's not hurting for mana at this point. Tower Drake with Extort.
Yep, that'll even it up at 21. Or rather drop Chris to 19, Anthony to 23. Going the wrong way here.
Chris, he'll be able to attack with Thrashing Moss Dog next turn if he wants. Anthony, can block profitably to just trade 1-for-1, but he's trading 1-for-1 with a Scavenge creature, which is not ideal. And also, Chris, continuing to represent a variety of spells and tricks. I feel like he can certainly attack with the Moss Dog. The downside being, if you don't attack with the Disciple, that kind of says, I don't actually have anything. I'm just kind of running you through the motions here.
Exactly.
And he has a Zertos Swine in his hand as far as like an actual trick goes, but he already burned his Rampager. I don't think he wants to burn the 5/4 to save a Disciple of the old ways. So probably just the Moss Dog.
And that's a pretty interesting comment about the Disciple of the old ways. Apparently Anthony doesn't feel like calling Chris here. He's just going to take the 3.
Yeah, I think I would have probably put Tower Drake and Dead Reveler on that Moss Dog. I'm not sure.
Wow, the Dreadbore on the Tower Drake really surprises me.
It's really aggressive. We're about to have a Zertos Swine on the next turn, so I guess he just wants to avoid taking some damage while he's got his Thrashing Moss Dog tapped. After all, we know that the Basilica Guard, or Basilica Screecher, sorry, can actually, extort in addition to attack, so it's entirely possible Chris could get as low as, 16, 15 on the next turn if he left that Tower Drake in play, and he's got cards in hand. He wants to just, spend his mana, get the cards out of his hand, continue to push the tempo of the game.
Yeah, really aggressive by Chris Van Meter.
Keymaster Rogue gives Basilica Screecher Vigilance for the mere cost of 2 mana.
So Anthony adds the 3/2 unblockable, going to try and pressure Chris that way. Right now, though, the Dead Reveler and the Basilica Screecher playing D.
Yep.
Don't expect that Keymaster Rogue to jump in front of anything anytime soon.
No, I could trade with the Moss Dog, but that's about it, and I think that would be a pretty awkward decision on Anthony's part. With the Keymaster Rogue in play, he actually is slightly ahead of the race on the board, as long as he keeps casting spells.
Yeah, right now Chris Van Meter has the possibility of 4 a turn with the Moss Dog and the Zerta. But that Rubbleback Rhino, the 3/4 Shroud, that might prove troublesome to Anthony.
Yeah, Chris playing the Rubbleback Rhino instead of the Zerta Swine obviously wants to keep the +5/+4 available for combat.
Right.
It's one of his stronger Blood Rush cards, but I imagine he's actually just going to wind up playing it. It's a 5/4. It attacks. That's what it's for.
Yep. Although it is nice to Blood Rush Rubbleback Rhino.
It is. You know, I saw Reed Duke Zerta Swining Rubbleback Rhino all day long in conjunction with Miming Slime in his Team Sealed win just last weekend.
Is that a Hunter of Nightvale for Anthony?
It is a Hunter of Nightvale. Walking Cumberstone. That's got a big habit of turning races around. Holding on to that Zerta Swine, it's probably going to pay off here, as it seems like he's going to have to use it in order to get that guy off the board.
Yeah. So the 3/4 Hunter of Nightvale doesn't look like that much just on its stats alone, but his ability is really powerful. And I played Cumberstone on its own. It cost 1 less and didn't have power or toughness.
Yeah,
so.
It did not attack for 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Or have a toughness resilient to most of the removal spells in the format.
Yeah, 4 is really that magic number here, isn't it?
Yeah, Haunter of Nightvale is a sweet card. I've gotten a lot of experience playing with it, and it's really incredible.
Yeah, it plus Smog Elemental give Black some really good tools to shrink their opponent's creatures.
Yeah, and with the addition of a lot of white 1/1 flyers to the format, Smog Elemental became a little more than a sideboard card, I think. When you start adding things like Cellar of Songbirds, Eyes in the Sky, especially the new Steeple Rock from Dragon's Maze, which Steeple Rock seems like a pretty good creature, but then you realize how many ways there are in RTR to just deal 1 damage to something.
Right. And then it gets Electric Reed.
Chris tanks for a little while and comes up with an attack that sends 2 2-power creatures into combat. Thrashing Moss Dog at 2/3 and Rubbleback Rhino at 2/4. Anthony, no doubt, smelling a trick.
Yeah, this would be a pretty crazy attack by Chris if he didn't have anything, because Anthony can just stick 1 creature in front of each one if he really wanted to.
Yep. That's the most conservative block. That way you ensure not getting blown out. But if I'm Anthony, I'm pretty tempted to make a stand.
Yeah, double block that
make him do
Rubbleback.
something. Yeah.
Chris also choked on mana, so if you don't make him play a spell, he gets to spend all 5 of his mana this turn casting a big fatty.
Right. I think Chris is kind of hoping that's what happened, that he gets in 4 damage and can play a 5/4 maybe. But Anthony's going to keep the Hunter Nightvale safely out of combat. I like that. And put the 2/3 on the Thrashing Moss Dog. So Chris is probably just going to do nothing here and play his 5/4. He got in 2 damage. Not quite what he wanted, but probably he's going to have to settle.
Yeah, it's not so bad. He'll take the 2 drops, or dropping Anthony to 15, and post-combat he gets to play that big 5/4. Unfortunately for him, though, that's at the expense of, I think, his last combat trick. Though Chris, like Anthony, making it hard for us to see his hand.
I believe he has in his hand a Golgari Guildgate, a Smeltward Gatekeepers. I can't tell if that's a Cobblebrood or I don't know, I almost want to say it's an Offer the Guilds, but he doesn't have one of those in his deck. Would be a savvy sideboard choice.
I would be surprised.
I would be surprised as well.
So yep,
It's
there's
a
that
red
Guildgate.
card at any rate. Rubblebelt Maka, okay.
Interesting
So-
that he chooses to play that instead of the Zerta.
Yeah. Maybe he's thinking he's actually going to sneak in +5/+4 for the kill
Wow.
at some point in this match.
That's really ambitious with Anthony at 15.
Yeah, I agree.
So Anthony untaps his lands, untaps his creatures, and decides on Basilica's Creature and Keymaster Rogue. Dropping Chris to 9.
I'm real curious about that choice of Rubblebelt Maka over Zerta Swine. I'm certainly going to ask Chris about it later.
Yeah, I can't say I agree with it, but then again, Chris is the one playing.
Yeah, I mean, if you
I'm
really
the
wanted
one
to convince
talking.
your opponent you didn't have a Zerta Swine in your hand, this is a totally reasonable line to take.
Yeah.
Draws
Ooh,
Grizzly Spectacle.
that
Wow.
is a great draw from Chris
Yeah,
Van
that
Meter.
can create a very sweet combat right here. I think you just immediately send everything after you draw that card.
Yeah.
It's actually impossible for him to come up with a bad combat.
It is interesting, though, because Anthony Zamberlan does have 6 mana untapped, so he could have a potentially devastating profit loss, or, as far as Chris is concerned, any number of blowouts. Something like a counterspell on the Grizzly Spectacle could turn what is a good combat into a nightmare for Chris Van Meter.
If he actually can get through, at this point it's worth pointing out that if he can get through 3 creatures, does he just have a lethal with the Zerta Druid and Zerta Swine?
Let's see, 13, 8. I don't think so.
I mean, if the Haunter dies. So I think he's setting up for a lethal swing next turn. But Anthony obviously a little, what do I do here? It's basically the same attack Chris made last turn, but it's worth noting Chris was willing to just make it again. So the same trick is present. Anthony should be evaluating that the Rebel Belt Mako was clearly not what tipped the scales last turn if Chris is willing to make the attack twice in a row.
Right, and if you're Anthony Zamberlan, this is a tough block. This is a really tough combat. To put Chris on a specific card from any one of 3 sets, a card that he hasn't seen yet in Game 1, Anthony's in a tough spot here.
Yeah, it looks like now he's going to risk putting the Haunter of Nightveil in combat. And this is the right turn to do it, because Chris is actually strapped on mana. He can't play the 2 spells that he has. So, this is a fine spot to make a stand. Of course, I don't think he really wants to play that Zerta Swine anyway.
No. At this point, when he didn't play it last turn, that means it's a combat trick.
He's going to Grizzly Spectral, the Haunter of Nightveil. Cancel. Wow. That's a sick one. That will wind up killing the Robobolt Maka in combat. And the Thrashing Wausau will continue to bounce off of Dead Reveler as opposed to get in the damage that Chris was expecting he'd actually be able to kill with. Yeah,
so Anthony Zamberlan made a really good choice of not blocking last turn because he had the cancel in hand. He decided, okay, I'm going to wait till I have 3 mana up, so that way I don't get destroyed by something like a Grizzly Spectacle.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Anthony Zamberlan playing a tight game here. Down a games, back to the wall with 1 loss. He has to win this one.
Now, if he attacks with everything, Chris will be forced to start blocking, as he's, presenting lethal. He's got 4 damage that's unblockable, so he doesn't even have to attack with everything. He can actually just attack with 3/4 and threaten a spell via Extort, but he's going to send everyone. That puts Chris into blocking.
Yeah, this is pretty awkward for Chris Van Meter. He's effectively at 4 because you see the Screecher and the Keymaster Rogue on the left side, or on the bottom side rather. Those can't be blocked. And with any Extort spell, he's at 3, so the Haunter of Nightveil threatening lethal here.
I feel like I just put the Zerta Druid onto the Haunter and probably ping, and then just take 6, go to 2. It's very unlikely I'm going to die to 2 spells with Basilica Screecher.
Right, it would have to be 2 2-drops, which at this point in the game, it's really unlikely Anthony has 2 2-drops.
Yeah, we don't know where Anthony's hand is or if he even has one, so we can't actually verify the likelihood of that. Chris, it seems, is going to hope to get in the extra damage via the mana on his Zerta Druid, but I think he actually nets a damage, assuming Anthony has no spell, by keeping the Disciple of the Old Ways. Of course, if Anthony has a spell, that's wrong. And given that it's this spell, I think I would have rather had the Disciple than the Zerta Druid.
Right.
We're going to be able to reduce Anthony to 12 and then 11 if we cast something with our Zerta Druid.
Oh, I think he gained 1 off the Assault, so maybe up to 14 down to 13.
13. So I think I would rather have the Disciple in play. At any rate, it's a very dangerous spot.
Right. It looks like there's a little life total discrepancy here. Anthony Zamberlan might have thought he was at 1 more than he was actually at. They're trying to figure it out right now.
Yep, looks like the players' sheets are probably just a little off. We'll get that verified for you guys quickly. So Chris currently, has, 5 damage on the table, another 5 damage in the hand. Anthony has a blocker. Looks bad for Chris. I can't actually think of anything to lock up this game, and he's dead to any number of swingbacks on the next turn. Forest does not break it wide open for him.
Not quite.
So looks like we're going to be moving on pretty quick.
Unless Chris Van Meter can pull something really exciting here. Nope, that's the scoop.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to show that Zerta Swine in any kind of, combat at that point.
No, Chris wants to keep Anthony guessing because, Chris presented Anthony with so many strange attacks that game, so many attacks that seemingly didn't make that much sense. Anthony's going to have to play around a lot of different cards in Game 3.
Yep, accurate.
So, if you're just joining us right now, I'm Zach Hall, and Glenn Jones is with me in the booth, and we're coming to you live from the Star City Open Series here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're in the middle of Day 2 right now, round 7 of 8 of this sealed deck tournament. Yesterday was standard. I hope you were watching, but in case you weren't, Steve Kaufman took it down in the finals with his red-green aggro deck, basically mono-red, but he had a little bit of green in there for some blood rush. And a flint hoof bore, of course. And right now, we're trying to decide the sealed deck champion.
Yeah, Chris going to the sideboard now, giving a look-see. Clearly has pulled out one card that he's considering. Looking for others.
Yeah, I really hope it's that give and take that we were talking about.
It's a Bronzebeak Moa.
Whoa.
Ooh, it's going in the tank. All right, he moves past that one.
Judge, I need 4 planes.
There's the give take. We see it at the back of the hand there, shuffling it around with a couple other cards.
Oh, I think that was the give take. I think he just put it down. He's going to try and find a card he wants to cut for it.
I think now that he can, put himself on the play, it gets a lot better.
And if you're Chris, what do you side out right here? What's not good against Esper?
Bomber Core has been just thoroughly mediocre in every match, and his deck doesn't really have the ability to turn on Battalion, so I'd be looking for that. We saw at the end of that game, I believe he had a Smelt Ward Gatekeeper still in his hand. Doesn't really have enough gates to reliably turn that on. It's just a 2-4 for 4. I would probably not be interested in that, especially when my opponent continues to play Dead Reveler in a defensive capacity.
Right.
And I see, Haunter of Night Vale. It's like, 4 mana 1/4 is not really where I want to be.
I like that decision. Chris Van Meter, pretty respectable wizard in his own right.
On the other hand, his Cobble Brute that he normally sides in also actually looking pretty good if I see Haunter of Night Vale. And even the Dead Reveler, like, I'm not happy about it, but if it trades with Dead Reveler, then, my Disciple the Old Ways and those guys can start attacking again.
Right.
So, he has a job. He can attack into Haunter of Night Vale, which is a big deal.
Yeah, the Cobble Brute doesn't really look that impressive, but as people learned right when RTR came out, it's a lot better than it looks. It can get in for big chunks of damage. It can trade way up, just like the Bellows Lizard me and Todd were talking about earlier, and it's not that bad.
No, I've cobbled myself a number of brutes over the days of RTR Limited. I especially enjoy teaching them to fly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pursuit of Flight on a Cobble Brute is a beautiful thing to witness.
Deviant Glee's not even so bad. I've Deviant Gleed a few times. I've never been very proud of the Deviant Glee, but we've definitely casted.
Have you ever Gift of Or's Holwood?
No, I can't say that I have, although I imagine I will at some point in this format.
I have, and boy, it's glorious. It's really nice.
I can only imagine the opponent's just dead stare into you. Really? This is what you're bringing?
This is happening to me. So Chris gives Anthony the stare down, waits for his deck, and here we go. He'll probably be on the play for this game.
I see a Mountain and a Devour Flesh, I think. I see a Verdant Haven. I don't know if I saw a green source.
Ooh.
I think he has his Clue Stone, so he might be willing to keep this relatively slow hand.
And yeah, it looks like he keeps Anthony Zamberlan going to Paris.
Unclear from their keeps whether or not Chris actually decided to put himself on the play or not. I actually like his hand a fair bit more on the draw, I think. If he can hit that forest, maybe actually get some action going.
Right.
A little earlier than, turn 4.
Yeah, and it really seems like Anthony Zamberlan's deck is pretty efficient at setting up the defense if you let him get to turn, say, 4, 5, 6 unmolested. Yeah. But if Chris can get 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, Anthony's immediately on the back foot.
Yeah, Anthony really just wants to set up a wall and start getting in for somewhere between like 2 and 5 points a turn without having to, rely on actual combat. He has unblockable creatures and extorters primary means to get in damage. And that's, he's been relatively successful at it. Both of the games have been very tight.
Yeah.
With Anthony much more in control of the second one, but very competitive in the first one.
Yeah, it was surprisingly close to it. It really looked like he was going to get beat down immediately, but the Soulsworn Spirit just kept pecking away, and he made it close. What's going to be key for Anthony in this game is the Murmuring Phantasm. If that was allowed to live game 2, the game wouldn't have been close. And that's probably the card he most wants to see here.
If I'm Chris, I'm probably even reconsidering, how highly I want to kill that card. The problem with Devour Flesh is obviously, you either use it on the first creature or you kind of don't use it at all.
Right.
It's not a removal spell you can effectively hold in most situations.
And that's a little gross for Chris Van Meter, a 4th mountain.
Yep.
Not what he wanted to see.
And there's his Cluestone. Yep.
Golgari Cluestone fixes most of the problems he's having right now.
And he drew a Dead Reveler, so next turn he can go Verdant Haven on one of the mountains and then cast Dead Reveler, which is a reasonable turn.
Yeah, not so bad. Considering how it started, mountain. Casting both a green spell and a black spell on turn 4, pretty good.
Anthony unleashing here. He's relied on this Dead Reveler for defense in every game up until this point, so it's pretty interesting to see him going on offense here. He knows Chris actually, could potentially brick it with any of his various 5s or 4s.
Yeah, I didn't know that Anthony Zamberlan had this in his arsenal right here. The Unleashed Dead Reveler.
I imagine Chris will be unleashing his as well. Anthony, needs to continue making land drops and spells. Chris can now, play pretty much everything in his entire deck.
So Dead Reveler gets in for 3, drops Chris to 19, courtesy of the Verdant Haven.
Chris already ahead in the race because of the Verdant Haven. Tower Drake is a nicey. Gives Anthony a way to keep forcing in damage. Lets him take advantage of Chris's vulnerability with having such a slow start.
Right, but now that Chris is online, I think he kept this in because he knew that Anthony couldn't really pressure him early. Had some of his most powerful cards, and here we see Gorklan Rampager, Devour Flesh.
Yeah.
Even the Gutter Skulk is going to get in versus he has no defenders.
It's interesting he went ahead and played Gutter Skulk Zertot Druid here. I would be pretty interested in just playing my 4/4.
Right.
That guy's serious. Maybe he's assuming that Anthony could drop Haunter of Nightveil, and that's really his only way to beat it at this point is Gorklan Rampaging whatever creature it blocks. But if Anthony's not under enough pressure to actually be forced to block, he doesn't have to. He knows that Rubble Belt Maka exists at a minimum, so he's not going to put it in front of that Gutter Skulk unless he actually feels like he has to.
Right. Also, it's also interesting to note that Anthony Zamberlan had the Leyline Phantasm in game 2, or in game 1 rather, so Chris Van Meter maybe didn't want to run the 4/4 right into the 5/5. Understandable to hold off one turn.
Of course, now he runs into the problem where, if Anthony's just holding open cancel at this point, what does he do? Because he's actually, the board is really positioned pretty awkwardly for him.
Yeah.
He's going to send for 5. Put Anthony to the test. Show me what you got. Looks like he's got Azorius Charm and Dramatic Rescue. He's going to go ahead and burn the Azorius Charm now.
Chris can't really do anything about that. Just has to let it happen. And he might considering Devour Fleshing during the upkeep or right now.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to Devour Flesh, I go ahead and do it right now. And I probably just play this Rampager again. I think it's a fine choice to get it on the board.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. Just because of the presence of the Leyline Phantasm, the 5/5 would just be... It wouldn't quite be game over, but it would be a big brick wall.
It would be big, but I think Anthony would have played it if he had it, rather than Azorius Charming on, 17 life.
Right.
Feels like a pretty stern Azorius Charm. And I imagine Chris will be planning to pop his Cluestone during the end step, as he doesn't really need double green, and he already has, Verdant Haven Swamp and Zertot Druid, so...
Right.
Get rid of that, draw a card, avoid some of the damage the Azorius Charm has done to his deck. Dramatic Rescue bounces.
Okay, end of turn Dramatic Rescue. So Anthony Zamberlan up to 17, and Chris Van Meter probably isn't even that upset about that. If he manages to draw a solid creature off the Cluestone in his draw step, he'll be able to keep the Zertot in hand, or rather the Gorklan.
Goes to the Devour Flesh when Anthony attacks with both. Could have gone for this in his end step to protect from cancel, but I guess he figures if this card gets canceled, that's fine. I have Gorklan Rampager and Dead Reveler coming down, both down next turn. So he's actually, I guess, not going to pop that Cluestone. His plan is just tap out for 2 creatures next turn. Totally fine plan.
Yeah.
Anthony clearly considering going for 4 life. I like that. I think that's the one I would get rid of as well.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when your opponent has Gutter Skulks and this 1/1 that's just been pinging you and a Dead Reveler that's going to be unleashed, I think you just want to set up some defense, continue attacking with your flyer, try and stabilize.
Keymaster Rogue. That was one of the worst cards for Anthony to have in this spot. It kind of slows him down. He doesn't really get to do anything else. He's already burned both of his 2-mana tricks that we've seen, so the white-blue he's left open is actually way less intimidating than Chris might otherwise find it. Even if he has something else, Chris is going to probably assume there isn't anything, because he's only seen Dramatic Rescue and Azorius Charm.
Right. So Anthony has available to him the far side of Far and Away, but that's not very good. Doesn't really have any more tricks.
Gutter Skulk clocks in for 2 damage. And he's going to have to play some catch-up. Anthony has almost double his life total now, and now with the Keymaster Rogues online, it's a 4-turn clock for Chris.
Yep, and Chris Van Meter out of cards. What you see is what you get.
Dimir Cluestone on Anthony's side into Tower Drake.
Okay.
Tower Drake with 2 planes up means it can actually block a Gutter Skulk and live, which will perhaps put some downtime on Chris's side of the board.
Chris does his little miracle check, doesn't see it. Hopefully for him it's a spell. If not, expect to see him crack this Cluestone right now.
I would be pretty tempted to have just drawn my card and attacked immediately. To just make my opponent assume it was Rubble Belt Mocker or something similar. Try and get that Gutter Skulk in there.
Right.
Looks like Chris might have drawn something that doesn't actually require that level of thought. It's 4 mana. What do we got?
Wow.
Killing Glare.
That is pretty good. Interesting that he chooses to go for that Tower Drake, though.
Yeah, Chris is all business.
Yeah. And you might hear in the background that was time in the round, but these players do have a little extra time, as you see there, about 4 extra minutes.
Chris got in for 8 damage there. With the 9 he can get off Zerta Druid. He's put Anthony to a 2-turn clock. Maybe he's hoping to put that Keymaster Rogue on defense. Anthony clearly low on spells. He pops Dimir Cluestone. I saw at least one card that was not a land in his hand, so he's got something. He's double checking what Chris has, and he sends. Wow. Very curious as to what his hand is here. Syndic of Tithes. Table gets bumped, and Murmuring Phantasm with Extort. That'll put Chris to 5, and Anthony to 9. Anthony goes back down to 8 to Zerta Druid in the end step, and the Cluestone will get popped. So Chris is going to want an attack here that forces Anthony to block with Syndic of Tithes. That's his number 1 concern.
Yep, there you see the Syndic, the Extort. Super relevant here at 5 life.
Zerta Swine. That's exactly what Chris wanted to draw this turn. It makes virtually every attack the full amount of lethal. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I think it is.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think
with
everything kills now. Just on Dead Reveler alone, Zerta Swine is the win. You can see Chris's leg in the bottom right corner, tap tap tapping. Oh, he's got one. He's one of those. Boys. One of those. He drew Rubble Belt Maka as well. Wow. Shows them both. Dusts his shoulders off, drops the mic, and walks away from the table. Chris Van Meter blood rushing his way to victory.
Congratulations, Chris Van Meter. He should lock up a spot in top 8 with that win.